The cold winds of Jotunheim slide across your cheeks as the open sleigh zips along the frozen rock. If not for the king's arms wrapped firmly around your waist, you're pretty sure that you would have been sent flying several times already. The massive hounds pulling the sleigh don't really seem to mind if the ride is rough and wild, and neither do any of the giants. You hadn't seen much of Loki in the days leading up to the trip to Asgard, so you're kind of thankful to be back in his arms again, even if it's only because he's dragged you back outside on some kind of crazy quest. Really, he hasn't said much at all about what this particular quest entails, and it's got you stressed. Peering up at him, you wonder if you should risk asking, but he doesn't seem like he's in a very conversational mood, so you just pull your hat down more firmly over your ears and lean back against his chest. It's not like it matters anyway. Wherever he's going, you're going. There are only 2 other small sleighs racing alongside yours. Jelp and Greip are on one, and there are 2 women that you've seen sitting on the steps of the dais on the other. No one bothered to introduce you, but they have a look that you're starting to recognize as Forest Giant, so you assume they're also from Frostbite's clan. Hope they don't decide to murder us, you think. The fact that one of them is holding on to an extremely lengthy spear isn't doing much good for your nerves. Loki finally barks something out and yanks on the reins, and the hounds come to a halt, their claws scraping along the ice. You cringe. You still aren't too sure how you feel about most of the animals on the planet. They tend to have too many claws, and teeth. You still see Managarmer's teeth in your sleep some nights. You're near a cluster of tall, misshapen rock columns, none of which look particularly sturdy, and you eye them suspiciously. The way your luck seems to run, they'll probably all start collapsing as soon as you step in between them. Not today, rocks, you think, huddling in the sleigh as Loki leaps out and starts speaking to Spear Lady. A few minutes later, he returns, holding out his hand.
Come along, mortal,
he says, a hint of a smile in his eyes, like he knows what you're thinking, and has decided that it's ridiculous. You let him pull you down onto the frozen ground, but you're frowning as you take in more of your surroundings, or rather, the lack of surroundings. Other than the pillars, there isn't much around. Come along where? There's nothing here.
Nothing that you can see, or that they can see, but that does not necessarily mean that nothing is there.
Spear Lady and her friend are watching you closely, so you fight the urge to roll your eyes. Whatever, Loki. I guess it would kill you to actually answer a question for once. He pulls a pack off the back of the sleigh and drops it into your arms. You struggle to get it onto your back. The thick, stiff layers of your coat don't make it easy, and neither does its weight.
You won't have to take that for very long. I'll take it as soon as we're out of sight,
he says softly, bending to straighten one of the straps on your shoulder. You blush, nodding. Okay, so maybe you could get used to Loki acting like a decent person from time to time.
Come.
Hand on your shoulder, he steers you forward, making sure to keep between you and the hounds, who are all watching you with expressions that are worryingly hungry.
Move quickly. I have no desire to be out in the wind any longer than necessary.
Neither do I.
Wait, sire!
Greip calls out, hurrying after you.
May I give an Unga something, sire?
I suppose. Within reason.
He replies, surprise evident in his voice. She nods, offering him a pendant dangling from a bright red string. Loki takes it, his brow raised.
No enchantments, I assume?
No, sire.
Very well.
He drapes it over your neck, and you twist the diamond-shaped wooden pendant around to look at it, completely baffled. It looks a little bit like a maze, you guess, although you can't imagine what the significance of that might be.
Safest of travels, your majesty,
Greip says, her head slightly bowed. It's a pretty interesting effect, considering that she's still a good bit taller than Loki, even when she stooped over. He actually smiles, though it seems like it's mostly out of confusion.
Thank you, Greip. And, you will keep an eye on that cedar brandy for me, won't you?
Her lavender blush flares to life, and you have to cough to hide your laugh.
Of course, sire.
She says, and then she hurries to tend to the hounds. Snickering, Loki guides you off into the rocks. Once you're pretty sure you're far away that the wind will drown out anything you say, you whisper, "You really love making people uncomfortable, don't you?"
Perhaps they should do better to hide their secrets from me then. A wise man uses what he knows.
It sounds like he's quoting someone, and you lean heavily into his side as your boots slip along the slick rock. Who taught you that? There's a small pause, and you glance up at him. Loki staring straight ahead, his eyes slightly narrowed.
The king of Asgard. A very, very long time ago.
He finally replies, a sort of bitter, mocking twist to his words. Oh, probably best to let that topic go. So I take it that this isn't going to be an official visit?
No, of course not. I have no intention of letting Odin find out that I still live until the casket is in my possession and we are safely returned to Jotunheim. Here, let me have that.
He stops for a moment and pulls the pack off of your back, easily slinging it over his own shoulder like it doesn't weigh anything. We're sneaking in?
Yes. I am very adept at stealth, you know. Besides, that is why I kept you in the first place.
Wait, what?
I told you that the only reason I kept you alive was because I could make use of you. Do you recall? Mortals are very mundane. They have little energy, for lack of a better term. I can displace my power onto you, and it helps to mask my full strength.
I don't get how that works.
You don't have to understand how it works, mortal. The point is that it does.
You walk along in silence for a few minutes more, the space between the columns becoming increasingly narrow.
Imagine that you have a sheet of cloth.
He suddenly says, spreading his hands out in front of him. A glowing, semi-transparent golden square appears in front of you, and you jump in surprise. He then conjures up a glittering green ball of light.
This is the weight of my life force, my power.
He drops the ball of light onto the square, and it ripples and dips.
Do you see this pressure, this strain on the fabric?
You nod, fascinated.
This is a very distinct imprint. There are few sorcerers in the Nine with this much force of the mortal, and I can assure you that Heimdall keeps a sharp eye out for each and every one of them.
So this Heimdall guy, this is what he sees?
Well, it is the easiest way for me to illustrate it for you. You must remember that we are gods. Things are not always exactly the same. We process the world in different ways.
Okay, keep it together, you think, wide-eyed. He waves a finger and the green ball of light splits in two and rolls apart.
See? They are smaller, and the pressure is lessened.
That kind of makes sense, I guess. Maybe.
One is me,
Loki tells you, pointing at the brighter of the two.
and one is you. But then, neither match the total strength of my magic, and so neither of us should raise the alarms.
So... okay. So, there's like a power sensor shield, basically, and a super magical person like you suddenly jumping through it will pretty much announce to Heimdall that you're probably alive and kicking?
Something like that.
Oh, okay. You try to poke the glowing little ball of light that represents you, but your finger passes straight through it. Why can't I feel your magic inside me then, if I'm carrying so much of it?
That isn't exactly how it works. Besides, you can feel it, can't you? You wouldn't even be able to move without it, not in these conditions. My power is what feeds the charms that keep you from freezing to death.
You turn back to him as he waves the illusion away, your mind spinning. Do you mean to tell me I've been carrying half your magic ever since you found me?
Yes. Clever, isn't it? I used to do this with Thor when we snuck away to go hunting in other realms. Heimdall was always difficult to evade, but I've grown rather good at it over the centuries. Let us move on. You are beginning to tremble.
Taking your arm, he begins to guide you forward again. He's been using you as a cistern for his magical power. Your heart falls just a bit. Well, that explains why he doesn't want me to go back to Earth. Not because he really wants me. It's because it's easier for him to sneak around without the Asgardian police catching him. And since he said that he doesn't mind if the rest of the realms know that he's alive once he has the casket of ancient winters back on Jotunheim, does that mean that he won't care whether or not you stick around after that too? You should be excited by this revelation. If he doesn't actually need you around, maybe you can convince him to send you through the next portal bound for Earth. But you don't feel excited. You feel dread. Maybe that's why he's being so nice. Suspicion trickles through your veins, sharp and biting. Maybe he's being kind of sweet now, because he feels guilty that he's planning to toss you aside and run off with Scotty as soon as you get back. Loki's grip tightens on your arm, cutting off your wildly spiraling train of thought.
That is all you. I can tell this time. What is it that you're thinking of right now, girl?
You're flooded with embarrassment. Nothing.
It is never nothing.
Do you really think that it will be okay leaving the Queen in charge? Especially with Hoblindi back in town? You ask, eager to change the subject.
Yes. The reward is worth the risk of her bounty and the rest of Jotunheim if I am truly able to restore the casket. She will keep her sons in line, and if she does not, I will hear of it. Your little forest twins will report any problems directly to me.
Why do you call them that? My twins.
Because, Inunga, I have no doubt that they are more loyal to you than they are to me, and I find it terribly amusing.
Honestly, knowing Loki, it's kind of surprising that he finds it funny. You'd expect the idea of people liking a mortal more than him to piss him off. What's this pendant for, by the way? All these lines. Is it a maze?
No, it is a tree. Yggdrasil, in fact. It's a token to keep you safe on your travels through the Nine. Very touching. Yet they mock true magics.
His voice drips with disdain. You hold it in the palm of your hand, examining the brightly colored threads that seem to be haphazardly woven through the branches of the tree. And the thread?
Threads of fate. You really should mind your feet rather than your jewelry. I shall be extremely irritated with you if you manage to break your neck.
Loki slides his arm around your waist as you slip and nearly topple over, and you feel an instant thrum of warmth, a desire to be closer. They actually like me, don't they? It's still a little overwhelming to think that they really care if you make it back in one piece. It makes you feel more important, more like a person. Loki looks almost surprised.
Of course they do. I would not leave you with them if they did not. Here we are.
He squeezes into the narrow crevice between two of the columns, one that you're surprised he's even able to fit himself into, and then he drags you into the darkness behind him. You expect something like the cave tunnel that you wound up in when you first arrived in Jotunheim, endlessly winding and dark. You braced yourself for a long, exhausting journey, but as soon as you're fully inside the crevice, you realize that it's really, really small. You're feeling claustrophobic. Your chest starts to squeeze. Loki?
It's all right.
He soothes, and his hand drops from your arm, his fingers suddenly twining with yours.
Only a few steps here, and then you might feel something strange. Now, keep your eyes closed. I won't let go.
How strange? You start to ask, but then there's suddenly nothing below your feet, and you silently scream as you plummet through space, the air torn from your lungs. Your knees nearly buckle when they hit something solid again, though the landing is a lot more gentle than you might have expected. Loki doesn't seem to mind that you've completely wrapped yourself around him, half expecting the floor to disappear as soon as you take another step.
Still in one piece, mortal?
More or less. I think I might have left my stomach behind, though.
Only one more jump, and then we'll be in Asgard. After that, it will only take a few hours to walk to the city, and I know a dozen different secret passages into the palace.
Another jump? Oh my god. Your heart is racing. How can he stand falling like that all the time? It doesn't seem like it bothered him at all. Just give me 2 seconds. Surprisingly, he nods. A few deep breaths help to steady your spinning head, which you still have pressed firmly against his chest. So, what are the odds that we're going to get caught sneaking into the palace and executed, or something?
If we were to be caught, you'll be delighted to know that the only one at risk of execution is me. The Allfather would likely send you straight back to Midgard. He doesn't think too highly of mortals traipsing about the realm eternal, I'm afraid.
Wait, really? If we get caught, I get to go home? Even in the dark, you can see his eyes glittering.
Yes. That is the most likely outcome. But I will die a gruesome death, and so I trust that you will make no attempt to sabotage me.
He trusts me? You feel that increasingly familiar warmth blooming in your chest, and your terror from the fall begins to melt away.
Time for the next step.
Loki announces, and then you're falling again. This time, you don't have a chance to close your eyes, and you catch sight of random swirls of purple and pink light flashing in the darkness. It takes longer this time for your feet to connect with something solid again, and if you were able to take a breath, you'd probably be shrieking profanities into Loki's tunic. Maybe it's for the best that you can't take a breath then, because that would probably get on his nerves. You don't really want to get on the nerves of the guy who's teleporting you through secret tunnels in space. The rocky cave that you land in is mostly dark, but Loki holds out his hand, and one of his glowing orbs of light appears and floats along in front of you, casting shadows along the cave wall. The rock, you note, is more brown than blue, and there's water dripping along the rough walls, which means that it isn't freezing. You take a breath, finally, and pull back your hood. No, it isn't freezing. In fact, it's barely even chilly, especially with all of the layers that you're wearing. After so many weeks spent on Jotunheim, it's kind of a shock to your system.
Well, mortal,
Loki says, prying your arms from his waist.
Welcome to Asgard.
He leads you through the tunnels for some time, and eventually, you emerge into some sort of densely wooded forest, filled with strange-looking evergreen trees that aren't quite exactly the same as anything you've encountered on Earth. For one thing, they're a lot bigger. Loki has changed his face and his outfit, though you can still make out a lot of his facial features. He's given himself a beard and curly sandy-colored hair, and it's extremely weird.
Your form is fine. No one will recognize you, obviously. But we will have to do something about your clothing.
A wave of his hand, and you're in some sort of light brown, long-sleeved gown. This is really weird. I can still feel all my actual clothes.
It does take some getting used to, I'll admit. We'll get you something real to wear once we're in the palace.
You pluck at the fabric, trying to wrap your mind around the fact that it isn't really there. Maybe this is how people go crazy, you think. Who are we supposed to be?
Servants. No one ever pays any attention to the servants.
He says, reshouldering the pack and taking your hand once again. Loki walks like a man with a purpose, and you have a hard time keeping up. You're pretty sure that he's forcing himself to go a little slower than he'd like, because he seems pretty impatient, even though he's keeping at a pace that you can barely manage. Eventually, the forest thins, and you stand and gape at the shining, towering buildings of the capital city of Asgard, glinting golden in the afternoon light. From the low hill where you stand, you can make out the faintest edges of what appears to be water, and beyond that, there are only stairs. Loki, It's... He watches you from the corner of his eye, an odd sort of look on his face.
I thought that you would like it.
He says simply, and then he starts down the hill to the dirt road that curls towards the city walls. You take a side path once you near the city, squeezing in a small, heavily trafficked gate that's watched over by a few tall men in gleaming armor. As soon as you see them, you feel a bubble of panic begin to rise, but Loki breezes past with only the slightest nod of acknowledgement.
Act as though you know the business that you're about, and you'll almost never be stopped and questioned. It is hesitancy that ruins a disguise. Remember that. Always show confidence, mortal, no matter what you truly feel.
The streets of Asgard are narrow and crowded, but you seem to be in some sort of working class area, because everybody looks pretty preoccupied with getting to wherever they need to go. Your grip on Loki's hand tightens. If you get swept up into the crowd, you don't know if you'd be able to find him again. Loki sees you taking it all in, your discomfort at the crowds.
The palace was attacked during the Convergence, the same event that led you to me. Workers have come from all over the realm, I'd expect, to assist with the repairs. It is far more hectic than usual, and it will make it easier for us to go unnoticed in the chaos.
Okay, you whisper. Your heart is in your throat when he simply waltzes in through one of the large open entryways situated underneath a large staircase on the outer edge of the palace walls. You assume it must be a servant's entrance, because everyone else you see is wearing similarly drab clothing. There are more soldiers lingering here as well, but Loki simply nods at them and they nod back. It's almost a shock when they don't suddenly reach out and grab you, or start sounding some kind of alarm. And you've clearly lost it. Because you should be the one sounding the alarm. Remember Earth? Remember home? Part of your mind whispers to you. But you don't want to go home if that means Loki will be tortured and killed. The thought of something happening to him makes you feel ill, and you wonder if he feels the same way about you, now that you've got the partial bond going on. Maybe you're just actually falling for him. Crazy, magical mate marks aside. At the pace he's keeping, you don't have much time to take it all in, but the best word you can think to describe the Palace of Asgard is grand. The halls are wide and open to balconies and courtyards. There are torches along the walls, and polished gold decorates many of the doorways and columns. It's beautiful, but in a different sort of beauty from the Palace of Asgard. This is where he grew up, you think, marveling at yet another massive tapestry hung along one of the walls. And then your eyes widen, because the next tapestry you spy actually has him in it, a gigantic-looking eagle thing on his arm. You turn to ask him about it, but he's got his eyes fixed straight ahead, and the words die on your lips.
Don't gawk. You work here, remember?
Sorry. A few turns later, and Loki suddenly ducks into what, at first glance, appears to be some sort of closet, pulling the door closed behind you. The dust stirs, and you try not to sneeze.
I like to think that this passageway was created by some prince long ago, who wished to tryst with a chambermaid. Or something else suitably scandalous.
Loki says, pushing some broom handles aside and tapping one of the stones behind them. The shelf beside you shudders, and then swings inward, and Loki drags you into the tunnel beyond it before you have time to really process the fact that you're sneaking around in ancient passageways in an alien palace. Your sneeze escapes. There's no light in the tunnel, and it seems like Loki doesn't need one, so you just do your best to stumble along behind him, grateful that he's still holding your hand. You aren't a huge fan of the dusty, dark tunnels and falling through wormholes, but the hand-holding? That's something you could get used to. He comes to an abrupt halt, and then holds out a hand, his fingers flickering with a golden light. He presses it against a wooden doorway where the tunnel ends, and there's a faint whirring sound when it slowly swings open, slightly groaning on its hinges.
I suppose it's been some time since I used this. Fortunately, my chambers are soundproofed and warded, even now. A shrine to better times, I suppose.
The room is dark at first, save for the faint glow dancing on his open palm, and you squint into the shadows, wondering what sort of sharp, austere place Loki of Asgard once called home. But then, a fire lights in the hearth on the far wall, lending the room a gentle glow, and you find that it isn't at all what you expected. There's a lot of dark, polished wood, plush couches ringing the hearth, and bookshelves that reach nearly to the ceiling. Thick, heavy curtains hang on either side of the fireplace. Judging by their size, you can only assume that the windows behind them must be absolutely massive. There are doors on either side of the room, equally imposing, equally polished. Really, you're a little shocked by just how cozy it seems. This is your room?
Yes.
His voice is quiet, and maybe even a little strained, and you feel a sort of powerful, longing twinge in your chest. You squeeze his hand. Gonna give me the grand tour, Your Majesty? That seems to break him from his trance, and he turns to survey the room.
I suppose. This is my private sitting room, as you can see.
He points to the door on the left.
That leads to my audience chamber, where I meet with guests. Or, well, men, I suppose. It's all long past now. The other door leads to my bedchamber and bath.
Pretty roomy, you remark. It's a massive understatement, but the whole atmosphere is pretty damn awkward, so you don't really know what else to say.
It looks completely undisturbed. I'd thought... well, it doesn't matter. I'm going to perform reconnaissance and to gather some supplies. You stay here. It won't do to have you wandering the halls like some sort of little lost lamb.
Sounds good to me. When you flop down on one of the couches, a cloud of dust erupts from the cushion, and you sneeze again. How long has it been since you were here?
Over 2 years.
Loki crouches in front of you, his finger pointed sternly at your face.
Cause me no trouble while I am gone, mortal. Understood? You may venture into the bath if you wish, but that is the limit to your freedom. Remember that these are the chambers of a sorcerer.
So, I shouldn't pick up any cursed amulets off the shelves or anything. Got it.
You tease, because you do not understand that is a very real possibility.
The blood drains from your face. Really?
Oh, yes.
He stands and heads for the door that apparently leads to his audience chamber.
I should not be gone long, but if something absurd happens and you are discovered, try wailing about being a poor innocent mortal. That should work wonderfully.
Great, thanks, you call after him, your voice dripping with sarcasm.
You're most welcome, mortal.
You're pretty sure you hear the door locking once he's gone, and you huff in annoyance. Of course, he better not get caught, because the odds of someone finding you in here if Loki disappears seems pretty slim, and being entombed in his royal bedroom seems like a pretty grim way to go. Curious about the passage, you go examine the bookshelf that you know conceals the doorway, but it's firmly back in place, and you're scared to try to touch it. It seems like Loki had to use some kind of magic to open it, and besides that, it's probably insanely heavy. But then, Loki's got his magic displaced onto you, right? And when he charms you, that's the magic that feeds the spells, which means that it's still accessible whenever he needs it. You wonder suddenly if there's any way that you could harness it. It's probably a crazy idea, but there's no one around to laugh at you if it doesn't work, so you hold out your hand just like he had done. What are you supposed to focus on? You think of all the movies you've seen and the books you've read. Feel the force, Luke, you tell yourself, and then you sigh, because you can't feel much of anything other than a slight sense of anxiety. You drop your hand. I guess I'll do something reasonable instead, like taking a bath. Honestly, taking a solo bath sounds like a pretty incredible prospect, especially since you won't have to worry about any giants randomly stopping by to have a chat with the king while you're both naked. There's a tiny hallway that leads to his bedroom and bathroom, and you decide to leave the bedroom for later. It seems a little intrusive to just waltz in there and settle in, especially since the man himself hasn't been here in years. When you step into the bathroom, you nearly sob, because it looks blessedly earthly. Fancier, maybe, but the toilet definitely looks more like a toilet than anything you've seen on Jotunheim. There's even a fairly regular-looking marble sink counter. The door latches behind you, but you can't figure out how to get it to lock. So you go ahead and start stripping down, staring at yourself in the mirror. There are mirrors in the Palace of Asgard, sure, but it isn't like you've really gotten to get a good look at your whole body since you've been there. For one thing, you're pretty much always wearing at least 3 or 4 layers, except when you're in the steam baths. You've lost some weight. It isn't really shocking, and you haven't been starving or anything, but you figure the strain from the climate must have been burning through more calories than you realized. Try this one neat diet trick. Scientists hate it, you think, poking at your arms. Loki didn't say anything about not touching things in the bathroom, so you dig through his cabinets. You're kind of afraid to uncork some of the glass bottles, but you figure they're probably either some sort of soap or perfume, and after taking a couple of experimental whiffs, you think you identify one that will work on your hair. It kind of smells like flowers in summertime, and you're a little surprised that he has it. It doesn't exactly seem like his style. After some more rummaging, you also find what appears to be some sort of razor, and you ponder a moment or two over that, because you can't imagine why Loki would need it. Now that you think about it, you've never seen him with even the faintest hint of stubble. Is that a giant thing? There's an uncomfortable second where you consider the possibility that he's had mistresses living in his room before, or something, and you feel your temper start to churn. Even though you know you shouldn't, you try to quell it immediately, just in case he can feel it. This guy has been fully grown since the time of the Vikings. Mulling over his previous relationships is probably not a path you want to go down, you tell yourself. But you do feel a sudden determination to impress him either way, and so you decide that you're just gonna have to make do with this slightly intimidating straight razor and hope for the best. I'm gonna get all silky smooth and fresh, and even if Loki isn't impressed, I'm gonna sleep like a queen tonight. His bathtub is unreasonably large, and also made of marble, and you're a little surprised by how easy it is to get the water flowing, though you have to spend a few minutes twisting different little knobs to figure out where the hot water is. You splash water around and rinse out some of the dust, then fill the tub, combing your hair as you wait. This is so surreal. Somehow, the idea that you're in a palace of Norse gods from ancient mythology is almost crazier than the fact that you've spent the past month as a pet on a planet full of giant ice aliens. Like, this is where Odin is from. Thor. What if Thor is here right now, actually? He definitely would take you back home, considering the fact that he seems really fond of humans. But then, there's Loki to consider. Weird as it may be, you want Loki to be king of Jotunheim. You think that he might be even good at it. And kingliness aside, you definitely don't want to risk getting him thrown into prison, or worse. No, you're going to accept the fact that your fate is tied to his for now, until he decides he's done with you and decides to send you away. Considering the fact that you're pretty sure you're starting to fall pretty hard for him, you kind of figure you might as well try and enjoy whatever time you have left with him. Man, my priorities are so messed up. Shaving actually goes better than you expected. You nick yourself with the blade once or twice, but it's honestly a pretty impressive job, all things considered. The flowery stuff lathers well in your hair, and you're feeling pretty proud of yourself when there's a tap on the door, and then Loki barges in without waiting for you to respond.
Luxuriating, are we?
You're glad to see that his normal face is back. You weren't a huge fan of the servant disguise. How was your pilfering?
Extremely successful.
His eyes are very intensely fixed on your face, and the fact that you can tell that he's trying not to catch a glimpse of the rest of you below the water just serves to make you even more aware of it. You cross your arms over your chest, flushing. Loki tosses a heap of cloth onto the counter.
For you, if you'd like to play at being a goddess for the night. Or you can stay in your clothing from Jotunheim if you prefer. I assumed you might overheat.
Oh, thanks, Loki. You sink a little lower into the water, because his gaze has dropped to your neck.
If I'd had any sense, I'd have spelled that collar to shock you every time you failed to address me properly, wench.
Well, if I was magic, I would put a spell on you that shocks you every time you call me something besides my actual name. He laughs, and he seems a little startled by it.
Finish your bath, then we will eat,
he says, pulling the door closed. You've been halfway expecting him to decide to join you, and you're embarrassed to find out that you're almost a little disappointed that he didn't. Oh well, at least it's more peaceful this way. Peacefulness is pretty wonderful. Once you've emerged and toweled off, you discover that the heap of cloth Loki left on the counter is in fact a very thin, floor-length gown. It's a pretty shade of rose blush, and the sleeves are loose and flutter open at the shoulder. Very dainty, you decide, daring to twirl in front of the mirror, smiling at the way the skirt flourishes. It's also a little shapeless, but you don't have a belt, and it seems like it was probably made for someone taller and more statuesque. Or maybe that's just the Asgardian style? Either way, it's nice to not be bundled up. You decide not to bother with a bra either. Might as well enjoy not needing every available scrap of cloth to stay warm while you can. Here goes nothing, you think, and then you push open the door and head off to join the king. Loki is staring at your chest. He's not doing a very good job of hiding it as dinner drags on, and you're caught somewhere between mortified and extremely flattered. Still, it's kind of making you feel powerful, and you suddenly lean back in your seat, pretending you don't notice. You're turning into a pretty good actress after all. How long are we staying again? He takes a bite of an apple. You've been very happy to discover that Asgard has plenty of fresh fruit. His gaze flickers to the fire, and then back to your face.
Only this night in the morning. Once I've stolen the casket from Odin's vaults, we'll need to step away to Jotunheim at once. The longer we're here, the more we risk discovery.
Makes sense. I wish we could stay here a little longer, though. It's definitely more comfortable.
That is more of a long-term goal. Are you enjoying yourself?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm kind of scared that things will go wrong, but no more than I have been in the past month, you know? I guess I'm starting to get used to constant danger. Speaking of, you say, drumming your fingers on the thin golden collar around your neck. Considering how there's no one around to challenge your property rights, any chance of this coming off for the night?
No. That stays where it is.
Loki replies, his voice slightly hoarse. There's a funny feeling low in your stomach, and you bite your lip, suddenly self-conscious. Okay. Can't blame a girl for trying.
We will need to be up before daylight, and you will be coming with me to the vault. No one's helped me, but I'm going to use you to keep watch while I take the casket. We must be prepared to flee immediately. Understood?
And you're going to give me, like, a knife or something? Show me how to take someone out just in case?
The thought of you attempting to menace a Nyheria is laughable. Absolutely not. Don't pout. You'd be skewered in an instant.
That makes me feel a lot better. Thanks.
You've been increasingly mouthy on this trip, pet. Be careful that the attitude does not accompany you back to Jotunheim.
His eyes seem like they're getting a little bit darker. You wonder if it's just a trick of the firelight. Sorry, sire. Licking the remnants of the peach syrup from your fingers, you stand and stretch, yawning. You want to go to bed now, since we've got kingdoms to topple in the morning? Loki's looking at the fire again, and you could swear that you see a hint of red in his eyes. Your heart is pounding, and you wonder if his is too, because you notice that his fingers are curled around the armrest of his chair.
You go ahead. I'll join you in a moment.
Apprehensive, but not entirely certain why, you quietly pad off to the bedroom. Well, glory be, you think, as you stand just inside his bedroom door, slightly dumbfounded. Loki's bed is a freaking longship, or at least it's a stylized version of one. It's also pretty massive and soft, a far cry from the piles of cushions and furs that you've gotten used to nesting down in over the past few weeks. You shake off the top blanket, but it isn't terribly dusty, and when you clamber into bed, you instantly decide that your little spa session in the bathroom was an excellent idea. The sheets feel like silk against your skin. You're too tense to fall asleep, even though it's extremely comfortable, and you start to a little bit when the door finally opens and Loki makes his appearance. He's about to climb into bed, fully clothed, and you look at him like he's lost his mind. You aren't going to sleep in all of that, are you? If you didn't know any better, you'd say that he seems almost embarrassed that you noticed, and he stiffly stands and peels off his jacket and tunic, and then sits at the edge of the bed and takes off his socks. It's kind of cute. You could get used to Loki looking like the awkward one for a change. In the dim light seeping through the cracks in the curtains, you can barely make out the mark on his neck, slightly shiny against his fair skin. Your mouth goes dry, and you roll on your side to face him as he slides under the covers. "This is a really cool bed," you say, and then you cringe. "Way to be seductive."
Dreams are an ocean, and this ship was made especially for me, to carry me safely through them. At least, that is what my mother used to tell me when I was very small.
He turns slightly towards you, his hands folded behind his head, and you notice that his eyes are just as dark as they had been by the fire.
Nonsense, I suppose. But the sort of nonsense that mothers enjoy telling their children.
I think that's really sweet. Loki sighs. You guess that's all the acknowledgement you're going to get, but it still kind of feels like progress, considering the subject matter.
You really should sleep.
Okay, you whisper, but you can't stand the tension for a second longer, and he's honestly kind of beautiful with the thin streaks of moonlight spilling across his frame, and so you push yourself up on your elbow and lean over to kiss him. As soon as your lips touch his, he freezes, still as marble, and your heart feels like it's about to beat through your chest. Then his fingers rake through your hair and he's pulling you back, but only slightly. When he says your name, his voice is so soft that if you hadn't been watching his mouth, you might have missed it.
I cannot give you what you need. I'm not a caring sort of creature, and you shouldn't think that I am.
He says, with slightly more force, and there's something like regret in his eyes. Your fingers find the bite mark, and his eyes flutter closed. You are overcome with a sudden, powerful urge to sink your teeth into his skin again, to taste him, to burn. Whatever you are, I like it, you manage to say, your voice rough. Loki lets out a soft breath, one of resignation, and then he drags you back down to him, crushing his lips to yours. He's every bit as rough as that very first time, and you like that too. His hands run down your neck, your shoulders, your arms. He grabs your waist and rolls you onto your back, and you only have a second to feel nervous about the fact that one of the shoulders of your gown has slipped before his mouth is there too, his fingers bunching up the long, soft skirt of your gown, his palm sliding against your thigh. He's everywhere, and it's still not enough, and the world feels like it's spinning. When he pulls away suddenly, you whine in disappointment. There's a look of frustration on his face, and he's practically panting. So are you realize. Whoops, must have forgotten to breathe. What's wrong? You ask, giving very serious consideration to the possibility of actually trying to wrestle him back into another kiss.
I want...
He gestures down at you, his brow furrowing, like you're somehow supposed to understand. What? Impatient, you twine your fingers in his hair, trying to draw him closer.
Everything. I want everything.
He whispers, his hand cupping your breast. You weren't expecting it, but it's wonderful, and you arch against him, practically purring in delight as he lowers himself to your neck, kissing and sucking a path from just below your ear down to your collarbone. He grinds against you, and your veins are burning. Your hand returns to his neck, and Loki groans.
Don't. I'm trying.
He whispers against your skin, but something inside of you snaps then, a flare of possessive lust churning through your blood, and you yank his hair, catching him off guard and baring his neck. Mine, you think, and your mouth closes over the mark that you shouldn't have been able to put there in the first place. And when Loki pushes you back down and snarls, a very animalistic, rough sort of sound that should terrify you, you're flooded with smug satisfaction instead. He jerks your underwear away, so hard that it tears, so hard that it hurts, and his fingers press between your thighs. Finally, some part of you rejoices, closing your eyes as an electric sort of pressure builds across your skin. And when his teeth close on your neck, you see stars. Maybe you are a star. You feel like you're on fire, burning bright and chaotic. There's a part of you that dimly wonders if it's supposed to feel like this. But then his fingers are inside of you, and the rest of your thoughts melt away. Loki. You breathe, holding him closer. Any space between you is too much, and you're almost furious at the fact that you're still in your gown. His teeth tighten, his touch roughens, and you dig your fingers into his skin, so close to something. And then it's overwhelming, and as that elusive something builds and crests, your world sparks and goes white.